Hello, again. In my past few videos, I've talked a bit about, going off track, going on track, behavior change, and our sense of self-worth, and mindset type stuff. And I've found myself having to be mindful of my wording, especially when it comes to the idea of good and bad habits and good and bad meals. I've found myself on occasion using words like good or bad when referring to behaviors. I think I've done a pretty good job of correcting myself when I've done that. And one of the reasons that I am working to be aware of that kind of language is because another key to long-term success is removing all morality from our food choices and removing that same morality from pretty much anything related to our own personal health and fitness. Now, that's not to say that there may not be certain situations where, I don't know, you could make the argument that there's a moral issue with not taking care of yourself. I could see that argument being made. However, my point here is more specifically about saying, oh, I was bad last weekend, I need to be good, or even going further than statements like that, which are typically more playful, beating yourself up over having a day, a night, or a week where you know that you weren't taking care of yourself, or where you know that that you weren't doing the things that you know you need to do to be as healthy and fit as you'd like. Now, I don't mean to say that there's anything necessarily wrong with not being happy with yourself for doing something that you know you deserve better. There's a difference between saying, oh my God, I feel like trash, this is not good for me from a health perspective. I know I've felt like that. I've had times where I've had a rough weekend, either at like a bachelor party, or I have a wedding or something, or hell, I just have a night. And I wake up the next day and I feel like trash because of food choices or booze choices. It just doesn't feel too good. And on those days, I might feel a sense of, damn, Rob, this shit can't happen again. But that's not necessarily thinking that specific foods or specific things that I did morally made me a bad person. That's not necessarily a moral judgment on myself, so much as it is recognizing that my actions don't align with my goals. Do you see the difference? Do you see the difference between attaching morality to a food choice or a lifestyle choice? The difference between attaching morality to those things or just acknowledging that those things aren't how you want to live your life for yourself. Does that make sense? So, for example, a common term or phrase out there is a cheat meal, or a cheat day. And the word cheat, to some people, that whole idea of a cheat meal or whatever, that might not carry too much weight. No pun intended. That's probably a horrible choice of wording. But whatever, we'll roll with it. The idea of a cheat meal to some people is something to be, something that's, okay, yeah, like I just really just ate something I wanted to. But that's more in the context of like I consciously made a decision to please my taste buds, even though I knew that it didn't align with my goal. And so they may call it a cheat meal, but they don't necessarily feel like they cheated. But not everybody's like that. Some of us, when we indulge in a food or a behavior that we know doesn't move us towards our goals, we do it and then we don't feel as though what we did doesn't align with our goals. Rather, we actually feel a sense of shame, as if that decision reflects on us as a person. Like, oh my God, I cheated on my diet. Like, that's very different than saying, yeah, kind of had a cheat day yesterday, tasted pretty good. Which still, arguably, for a lot of people, might not be a good strategy in the long run. That's a very individual thing, and we could talk about that, and you could argue either way. I've heard compelling arguments on both sides, and I'm not getting into that. But what I will get into is that your food choices, at least in terms of how you view yourself morally, and in terms of how you view yourself as a person, your food choices shouldn't be a part of the equation. There is nothing moral about food. Eating one thing or eating another thing doesn't make you any better or worse of a person than the people around you eating differently. Now, on that same note, I'm glad I threw in better on that last sentence. In the same vein, not only should you not beat yourself up for making certain food decisions, don't think that you're better than somebody else because of your food decision. Regardless of whether what somebody else is eating actually is healthier or not. You know, for example, we get the whole paleo versus vegan thing, and just saying, both of those sides can be assholes to the other side, for lack of a better term. Both of those sides of things, they can have a lot of pride. It's almost like, oh, I'm morally superior to you for how I eat. Don't be like that. What you eat has nothing to do with how good of a person you are. Now, obviously, let's say if you're eating a certain way because of treating animals fairly, or if you're eating a certain way for environmental sustainability, even then, there are different ways to argue both sides of things, based on who you happen to believe in terms of research and science. For instance, there's a lot of argument out there against veganism for environmental sustainability, particularly when it comes from monocrop farming. That's a valid argument to me. My point is here, I'm opening up too many cans. My point here is that of all the things to base how we view ourselves as people and how positively or negatively we're contributing to the world, specific food choices are not probably number one on the list. You could argue that in some ways, certain ways of eating are better in terms of other people's lives than others. But way more important than that is, do you say please and thank you? Do you hug your family? Do you call your brother, your sister, your mom, and your dad? Do you spend time with your friends? Do you work hard on the job? Those things are so much more important, and they will take you further, or maybe not take you further. They will allow you to impact the world in a much better way than whether you choose to eat meat or not, or whether you choose to not eat certain things. Don't attach morality to food. Okay? Cool. That's all I got. damn, I covered a few different ideas there. So I might have to revisit some of those. I apologize. But not really. Anyhow, I'm done. Have a great day.